We have in First Samuel the scene that I've mentioned in class where David spares Saul, and then he yells to him from the neighboring hill, "Why have you been pursuing me? Why are you coming out against me as against a flea, as against a dog?" And then 1,000 years later, when Jesus says this to Saul of Tarsus, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Saul of Tarsus, who becomes St. Paul, recognizes the recapitulation of this event and sees that Jesus is the true David, and he, Saul of Tarsus, can become the true Saul, because when Saul repents in the Old Testament, it never sticks. But Saul in the New Testament, St. Paul, can say, "I have not been disobedient to the heavenly vision." And of course, Saul says much more. We're going to look at 2 Corinthians 11. There is speculation as to what goes on between these epistles. Paul, after his conversion, travels around and establishes churches, and then he writes to these churches and visits them again to try to make sure that things are going well. And typically things aren't, because people being people, original sin being what it is, even in the first century, you have all this nonsense going on. But what you have with Paul is something that we no longer have, at least not from typically the official representatives of our church. We don't have bishops, and typically we don't have even priests or pastors or deacons who say what Paul says, because Paul is very emphatic about the dangers of embracing a false Jesus, which is idolatry, because Jesus is God. Now, the speculation is that Paul establishes the church in Corinth. He leaves there and goes on his missionary journey. He writes 1 Corinthians to them, in which he, in particular, criticizes them for swallowing a case of incest that they're not taking a stand against, and other things in that first letter. Then he writes the second letter. He apparently visits them in between the two letters. There may have even been a third letter that is lost. We don't know for sure. Some people say the third letter is included in the second letter. I mean, there's all kinds of guessing that's going on. What we know is what Paul says. One of the things he says is that he is contemptuous in person. He's apparently short. He has an eye condition. He was blind for 3 days. He doesn't speak well. Perhaps he has a speech impediment. He is weak and contemptible in person. But of course, in writing, he's very strong. Now, he appears to be, in chapter 11 here, this polemic, this argument is against something that we have to sort of fill in the blanks. What is he arguing against? Apparently, some sort of rock stars have been going around saying, "You heard of this Jesus from this little guy, Paul, who's kind of annoying? Well, we're not annoying. We've got a guitar, and we've got these really great Marty Hogan and Dan Schutte tunes, and we're going to sing them for you, and we're going to get happy clappy, and we're going to pitch you a new and improved Jesus. You heard about Jesus from Paul, but that's, he talks about Christ and Christ crucified. We're going to make it a little more pleasant, okay?" And so the Corinthians are buying into heterodoxy, idolatry. And again, I'm sorry to say, at the typical Mass, especially at a suburban parish, maybe even at a Latin Mass, how many different Jesuses are being worshipped? Well, you don't have the preaching that Paul gives out of love, out of a kind of jealous love, as he says to the Corinthians, where he gets in their face for what they're doing. And, the tone of this letter changes. Some people think that, maybe he got some bad news. Of course, he's dictating this stuff, because most of these letters, somebody at the end says, written by so-and-so, the scribe. So you can imagine Paul pacing and talking fast and filled with emotion, and the scribe doing his best to get it all down. This is Paul talking, and it ends up in a letter. I hope you will put up with me. I'm reading on the left column, which is the New International Version. On the right is King James. I hope you will put up with me in a little foolishness. Yes, please put up with me. I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. I promised you to one husband, to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to him. But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the spirit you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it easily enough. When's the last time you were reminded that we are being purified and prepared as the bride of Christ? That that's what the church is. When's the last time you were reminded that the bridegroom will come at the end of time, and he will come at the end of our lifetimes, and he comes to us in various ways every day. And he expects and hopes to find us by his grace, purified, that we may be ready for the wedding feast, so that we may no longer be wanton, whoring after false gods, which is the image that's used in the Old Testament of the Israelites and their idolatry. God wants a special people to be his bride, and they behave as prostitutes, which is why Hosea is made to marry a prostitute. We find out in the book of Hosea, as a sign to show what God has to put up with his people. When do we hear this? We're not just to be purified so that we can make it into heaven. First of all, we hear almost nothing about sanctification. We're not just supposed to be made holy just so we can go around and lord it over others and impress people with how holy we are. We have a bridegroom that we have to prepare for. I've never heard that mentioned in 20 years as a Catholic at any homily. You know, I really complain a lot in these videos because I'm a curmudgeon, but it's all true. Let's go a little further. Now, these other people are rock stars, you know. They're coming through and they're selling a Jesus that's not the true Jesus. So he critiques them, these rock stars, these super apostles. I do not think I am in the least inferior to these super apostles. I may indeed be untrained as a speaker, but I do have knowledge. We have made this perfectly clear to you in every way. Was it a sin for me to lower myself in order to elevate you by preaching the gospel of God to you free of charge? Now, Paul is reminding them that even though he who preaches the gospel should make a living by the gospel, and it is not right to muzzle an ox as he is treading out the grain, nevertheless, and he talks about this in 1 Corinthians, he says he is willingly foregoing his rights. Why? Because he doesn't want anything to stand in the way between the gospel and the reception of it. He doesn't want the Corinthians to say, you know what, he's just doing this for money. He doesn't really want to make tents anymore. He wants an easy way to live. He's a professional Catholic. St. Paul, he's a professional Catholic. That's why he's doing this. No. He's doing it free of charge. And then he reminds them that when he was in need, the folks from Macedonia came and supplied his need. He never burdened them financially. And the beg that he just did in the last few chapters is not for him. It's for the people who need it in Jerusalem. So he's reminding them that he has no vested interest in this. He's doing it for the sake of the gospel, and he's living in such a way that they can't touch him. Okay, let's do a little bit more. I'm going to skip to the end just because. Share. Okay. So yeah, he talks about how he did it without charge and so forth and so on. All right. Well, he talks more about these super apostles. And I will keep on doing what I'm doing in order to cut the ground from under those who want an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things they boast about. For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ. How judgmental. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. When you lie and you put up a false front, well, then your father is the father of lies, and you are not one of Abraham's children. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It's not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. By the way, it's amazing to me as a former atheist and a former everything, a former New Ager, a former Jungian, a former Protestant. It's amazing to me how something like a cassock is so effective that people look at the outward show and they think, oh, a cassock, he's on my side. He's not one of those liberal priests wearing a sweater. He's wearing a collar and a cassock. Maybe that means something, maybe it doesn't. I mean, we're supposed to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, but most of the time, we're so easily fooled by the simplest of shows, by the simplest of outward displays. We don't look at what people do. We don't look for any consistency. We don't look, ye shall know them by their fruits. We don't look for their fruits. We just want to kind of swallow something easy. Well, anyway, 'twas ever thus. Was this way in the first century? You know, I really am a curmudgeon. I'm going to share again. But you know, you made me this way. I am what you made me. I am what you made me, church. I repeat, let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then tolerate me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. Here comes his boasting. I love this part. In this self-confident boasting, I'm not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool, because of course it's stupid to boast about these things. Okay, let's skip down a little bit. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I've spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressures of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn? But if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of the Damascenes guarded in order to arrest me, but I was lowered in a basket from a window in a wall and slipped through his hands. Now, I didn't really get into it because I'm in a hotel room and I don't want to wake up everybody who might still be sleeping. But imagine this. He's not messing around. Look at how much he suffered. He has the true gospel now. You could say, well, he's just the side that won. No, he's not. Because the other side has been fighting the battle for all these years. He is weaker than the super apostles. He was more persecuted than they were. They're not as persecuted because they're selling people what they want to hear. It's the weak side that continues to win. This is a church that knows its way out of the tomb. This is a church that where I am weak, then I am strong, is what we can say. At any rate, there it is. There it is, preached with emotion and conviction He's angry because he's heard that they are so easily putting up with it. They're letting people slap them in their face. That's a part I skipped. You'll put up with anything, Corinthians. What do we put up with? What do we swallow? I mean, it's a joke because we're afraid to say you're a false apostle. This is not the true Jesus. We need to get some backbone. We need to be like Paul.